Before we begin, I need you to understand something. What you're about to read will break your heart, and then put it back together in the most beautiful way possible. A man who lost everything because he chose work over love. A woman who raised their son alone for 5 years, and one chance encounter that would reveal a secret so devastating, so life-changing, it would force them both to confront the biggest mistake of their lives. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because this story has an ending so powerful, so redemptive, you'll never take your family for granted again. Trust me on this. Now, let's begin. Chicago could be beautiful at this time of year. Golden September afternoon, light reflected off elegant shop windows, and the streets smelled of fresh coffee and approaching autumn. Alexander drove his convertible slowly, almost lazily, a rare moment of respite in his perfectly planned day. 42 years old, business empire, penthouse apartment with a view of the skyline, everything one could want. And yet that feeling of emptiness never quite disappeared. 6 years ago, his life had fallen apart. Natalie left in an atmosphere of bitter words and mutual accusations. He remembered her last words. "You'll never be able to love anything more than your work." They sounded like a verdict. Maybe that's what they were. For the first months after the divorce, he drowned himself in business, contracts, business trips. Work became a drug that eased the pain and then over time simply became habit. Life went on, success grew, but the nights remained empty. He approached an intersection near Chardon's boutique. It was one of those neighborhoods where elegance mixed with carelessness. Women in designer dresses, men in perfectly tailored suits, children in clothes that cost more than the average American's monthly salary. And then he saw her, Natalie. His heart leaped to his throat, that long blonde mane flowing in the wind, white shirt dress tied with a brown belt, sunglasses, pink purse. She looked exactly as he remembered her, maybe even more beautiful, as if the last years had added confidence she'd once lacked. But it wasn't her that made Alexander forget to breathe. It was the child at her side. A small boy, maybe 5 years old, dressed in a white shirt and beige pants with a belt. He walked confidently, holding his mother's hand. His hair was carefully combed. He had that childish elegance that seemed both natural and practiced. And then, the boy turned his head. Time stopped. Alexander stared at a face he knew better than his own, because it was his face from 37 years ago. The same jawline, the same eyebrows, even the way the boy wrinkled his nose while looking at something in a shop window was identical to a gesture Alexander made unconsciously since childhood. The world began to spin. The math was simple and merciless. 6 years since the divorce. The boy was about 5 years old, which would mean his hands clenched on the steering wheel. Behind him, someone honked. The light had turned green, but Alexander stood paralyzed, watching as Natalie and the boy disappeared into the crowd of pedestrians. Was it possible? Had Natalie been pregnant when she left? For all these years, had she been raising his child alone, never saying a word? A million questions exploded in his head simultaneously. Why hadn't she told him? Was it revenge? A desire to protect the child from a father who was never home? Or maybe she'd tried to tell him and he'd been too busy to hear. Memories began returning like fragments of a broken mirror. The last months of their marriage. Natalie had seemed different, more withdrawn, crying more often, saying they needed to talk. And he always postponed those conversations for later, for a time that never came. What if she'd tried to tell him about the child and he'd been too blind to notice? Another horn behind him. Alexander mechanically moved forward, but he didn't remember how he got to the office. He parked in the underground garage of his tower and turned off the engine. In the rearview mirror, he saw a man he barely recognized. Eyes wide open, face pale, hands trembling. His entire perfectly constructed reality had just collapsed. He had a son. Possibly had a son he'd known nothing about for 5 years of the boy's life. 5 years of first steps, first words, first days of preschool. 5 years he'd never get back. He got out of the car and leaned against the hood. His chest. He felt physical pain, as if someone was squeezing his heart in their hand. All these years, he'd thought the worst was behind him, that the pain of losing Natalie was the heaviest burden he'd have to carry. But this was much worse. This was regret for a life he'd never lived. for a childhood he'd never seen, for a bond he'd never built, and the worst question of all, the one that gave him no peace, that burned like acid. Did the boy even know he existed? The next days were torture. Alexander tried to return to normalcy but couldn't. Business meetings passed like fog. He sat at the conference table, nodded at appropriate moments, signed documents, but his mind was elsewhere. He kept seeing that little face, that childish reflection of himself. At night he didn't sleep. He tossed and turned in his enormous bed in an apartment that suddenly seemed even emptier. He got up at 3 a.m., stood by the panoramic window with a glass of whiskey, and looked at illuminated Chicago, wondering where his son was sleeping now, because he was increasingly convinced it was his son. The resemblance was too striking to be coincidental. He remembered old albums from his own childhood, photos his mother kept in the credenza, himself at the same age, in a similar shirt, with the same facial expression, as if genetics had left an unmistakable signature. But what should he do? Call Natalie after 6 years of silence? Show up on her doorstep and demand explanations? What if he was wrong? What if the boy was someone else's son and he was making a fool of himself, seeing similarities where there were none? Worse, what if he was right and Natalie had her reasons for excluding him? What if he'd been such a bad husband that she deemed him too bad to be a father? That thought hurt, most of all. On Thursday evening, he sat in his library, looking at framed diplomas and certificates on the wall. Proof of success, proof that his life had meaning, but none of them could fill the emptiness that had just formed inside him. The phone rang. His assistant, Magda, a woman in her 50s who'd worked with him since the beginning of his career. "Mr. Alexander, I've noticed you've been absent lately. Is everything all right?" For a moment he considered the standard answer. "Everything's fine, just tired." But Magda knew him too well. "I saw someone," he finally said. "Someone from the past. Mrs. Natalie." The silence on her end was answer enough. "I thought that might be it." Magda sighed. "You know, I didn't want to say it then, but I always thought you gave up too quickly after the divorce. She wanted to leave. She wanted you to fight, to show you weren't just a businessman but also a human being." The words hurt because they were true. "Is there something else?" Magda added. "I saw her with a child, a boy. He's maybe 5 years old, and he looks exactly like me at that age." The silence on the other end was long and significant. "God," Magda finally whispered. "You think?" "I don't know what to think. That's why I can't sleep, why I can't focus on anything else. You have to find out. You can't live with that question. And if the answer is worse than the question, at least you'll know and can do something about it." Magda was right, as always. On Friday morning, Alexander hired a private detective. He felt terrible doing it, like he was stepping into the shoes of a controlling husband spying on his wife. But he needed facts. He needed, though, to know before he contacted Natalie. The detective was discreet and professional. Within 3 days, he delivered a report. Natalie lived in a decent apartment in Lincoln Park. She ran her own art gallery that had moderate success, good enough to support herself and the child. The boy was named Jacob. He attended an exclusive preschool. There was no husband, no partner. Natalie was raising him alone. And Jacob's birth date? Alexander looked at the numbers and felt the room spin. 9 months after, their last night together, a week before the divorce was finalized. This was his son whom he'd known nothing about for 5 years. He sat in his office, holding the report with trembling hands, anger mixed with pain with confusion. Why had Natalie done this? Why had she deprived him of those 5 years? Deprived Jacob of a father? But then he remembered their last argument, the screaming, the accusations, his words. "Maybe it's better we don't have children, because I'd never be home anyway." He'd said it in anger, in despair. But words remain even when emotions fade. Was that why she'd never told him? Had she decided he'd written himself out of parenthood before it even had a chance to begin? Alexander closed his eyes. He had to talk to her, had to hear the truth from her lips. But first, he had to understand what he really wanted to achieve. Revenge, justification, the right to be a father, or maybe just a chance to fix the biggest mistake of his life. Alexander stood in front of Natalie's gallery for 20 minutes before he gathered the courage to enter. It was a small, elegant space in a building in River North. Through the glass windows, he could see white walls decorated with contemporary paintings, wooden floors, soft spotlight lighting. Everything was refined with taste, exactly what Natalie had dreamed of when they were still together. Back then, she'd never had time to realize her dreams. He'd always convinced her the gallery could wait. That, first he had to stabilize his company, that later there would be time for her passion. And she waited, until she finally stopped. He pushed the door. A bell rang. Natalie emerged from behind the counter, a welcoming smile on her face, a smile that froze when she recognized him. She stood motionless, as if she'd seen a ghost. Her hand traveled to her neck, that familiar gesture she always made when she was nervous. "Alexander," she whispered. "Natalie." They were silent for a long moment. 6 years of separation hung between them like an invisible wall. What are you doing here?" she finally asked, her voice barely audible. "I saw you last week, near Chardon's." He saw something flash in her eyes, a spark of panic she tried to quickly hide. "I saw you with a boy," Alexander continued, walking deeper into the gallery. "With Jacob." He heard her hold her breath. "How do you know his name?" "I found out. I had to find out, Natalie. Because when I saw him..." He paused, searching for the right words. It was like looking in a time mirror. Natalie turned away, pretending to adjust one of the paintings on the wall, but Alexander could see her hands trembling. "I don't know what you're talking about. Please don't lie to me. Not now." Silence filled the gallery. Somewhere on the street a car passed. Someone laughed. Life went on, indifferent to the drama unfolding in this small space. "How old is he?" Alexander asked, his voice breaking. "That's none of your business." "How old is he?" Natalie finally turned to him. Tears glistened in her eyes. 5. He's 5 years old, and he's my son." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Natalia didn't answer, but the silence was answer enough. Alexander felt his knees weaken. He leaned against the counter, trying to maintain balance. One thing was knowing, another was hearing confirmation. "Why?" he whispered. "Why didn't you tell me?" Natalie's face hardened. "Are you really asking? You really don't know?" "I had a right to know." "You didn't have time to even be a husband," she exploded. "How are you going to be a father?" The words hit him like a physical blow. "I tried to tell you," Natalie continued, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "For the last 2 months of our marriage I tried, but you were always busy, always had a meeting, always had to fly somewhere. And then that last night you said..." "I know what I said," Alexander interrupted, his own voice breaking. "I remember every word, and I regret them every day. You said it was good we didn't have children, that you'd never be home anyway. I was furious, hurt. I said things I didn't mean, but I was already pregnant when you said that," Natalie whispered. "I was sitting there with a positive test hidden in my purse, listening to you say you were glad you didn't have children with me." Alexander closed his eyes. If only he could turn back time. If only he could take back that evening. "So I made a decision," Natalie continued, "that if you didn't want to be a father, you wouldn't have to be. That I'd give Jacob a stable childhood without a father who appeared and disappeared, without false promises and disappointments. But that wasn't your decision to make," Alexander said, raising his voice. "He's my son, too. Now you say that, but where were you these 5 years? Did you ever wonder? Ever try to make contact? Because I thought that's what you wanted, that you wanted a life without me." They stood, facing each other, both crying, both hurt, both right, and both wrong at the same time. "I lost 5 years," Alexander finally whispered. 5 years of my son's life, his first steps, first words. "I can't get that back, Natalie, but please, don't take away the future." Natalie wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "He doesn't know about you. He thinks his dad, that you left before he was born, which is true in a way. I can't just bring a strange man and say, 'This is your father.' I'm not a strange man. I'm his father. To him you are. Don't you understand? I built a safe world for him. I can't destroy it now." Alexander stepped closer but didn't touch her. "I'm not asking you to destroy his world. I'm asking you to let me become part of it. Slowly, carefully, at a pace that's good for Jacob." Natalie looked at him for a long time, searching for something in his eyes. Sincerity, determination, maybe the same man she'd once fallen in love with. "I need to think," she finally said. This isn't simple. It's not just about the two of us. I know. And if I decide to give you a chance, if you hurt him, if you disappoint him, I won't, Alexander interrupted. I swear on everything I have. I won't let him down. Not like I let you down. Natalia looked away. Tears still streamed down her cheeks. I'll call you, she whispered. I need time. Alexander nodded. It was more than he could have hoped for. He left the gallery into the cold Chicago afternoon, feeling a strange mixture of hope and despair. The truth was now revealed. Natalie knew that he knew, and now everything depended on her decision. Would she give him a chance to know the son he'd never had? The week dragged like a month. Alexander checked his phone every few minutes, nervously watching for a message or call from Natalie. Every vibration caused a surge of hope, then disappointment when it turned out to be just a work email or bank notification. Work, which had once been his escape, now seemed meaningless. He sat in board meetings listening to financial reports and development strategies. But the numbers on the charts no longer had the same weight. What did it matter that his company had achieved record profits in the third quarter if his son was growing up without him? Magda noticed the change. You're somewhere else, she said one afternoon, bringing him coffee in his office. I talked to Natalie, Alexander confessed. She knows I know, and she said she needs time. That was a week ago. Magda sat across from him, something she only did when she wanted to talk as a friend, not as an assistant. You know what I've noticed in all these years working with you? She asked. What? You've always been great at business because business has clear rules. You sign a contract, you get results. You invest money, you get returns. Everything is predictable. Where are you going with this? People don't work like business contracts, Mr. Alexander, especially hurt people. Natalie needs, time not because she wants to punish you, but because she has to think about what's best for the child. And if she decides the best thing is keeping me away, then you'll have to respect her decision and prove her wrong. That evening, Alexander did something he hadn't done in years. He went to visit his mother. She lived in a small house on the outskirts of Chicago, surrounded by a garden to which she devoted more attention than most people devoted to their children. She was 72, years old, but still vibrant, witty, and ruthlessly honest. Well, she said, opening the door. The millionaire's son finally found time for his old mother. Mom, come in. I made stew. You look like you haven't eaten in a week. They sat in her cozy kitchen eating stew and bread. Alexander had forgotten how much he missed this simplicity, an ordinary meal, without elegant place settings and waiters standing by. Something's eating at you, his mother stated, watching him carefully. I see it in your eyes. For a moment, he hesitated, but if anyone could understand, it was her. I have a son, he said quietly. A 5-year-old son I found out about 2 weeks ago. His mother set down her fork. Her face remained impassive, the same face that had survived her husband's death, financial hardships, and raising a son alone. Natalie? He nodded. Why didn't she tell you? Because I was a bad husband, and I said things to her, things I shouldn't have said. His mother stood, poured herself tea, and sat back down. You know what your father told me just before he died? She asked. Alexander shook his head. He said, I regret spending so little time with Alexander. I regret every game I didn't watch, every school event I missed. I thought I had time, but there's never enough time. Alexander felt a tightness in his throat. You went down the same path, his mother continued. You built an empire just like he built his company. And like him, you forgot that true success isn't measured by what you leave in the bank, but by what you leave in people's hearts. I know, Mom, but what do I do now? You have to show Natalie you've changed, not with words. Anyone can talk. With actions, consistency, patience. And if I don't get a chance, then you create one. But remember, it's not about you. It's about that boy, about Jacob. He didn't ask to be born to a father who didn't know about him. If you really want to be his father, you have to start thinking like a father. His mother's words stayed with him for the rest of the week. He began to change even before he got an answer from Natalie. He reduced his work hours, delegated more tasks. For the first time in years, he started leaving the office before 8 p.m. He read books about parenting, about building bonds with children. He felt foolish reading these guides in his luxury apartment, but he absorbed every piece of information like a sponge. He wanted to be ready. When the moment came, if the moment came, he wanted to know how to be a father. Finally, 13 days after their conversation in the gallery, the phone rang. Natalie. Alexander's heart beat faster as he answered. "Hi," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "Hi. I've been thinking, a lot of thinking, and—" The silence on the other end was unbearable. "I'll agree to a meeting," she finally said, "but on my terms, and very, very slowly." Alexander closed his eyes, a wave of relief flowing through his body. "Any terms. Whatever you need. I won't tell him right away that you're his father. First, you have to become someone he can trust. Someone who's just there. I understand. Saturday, we're going to Millennium Park at 10 a.m. You can come. Accidentally run into us, and we'll see how it goes. I'll be there. Alexander? Yes? If you do this, if you show up in his life, you can't disappear later. You can't hurt him the way you hurt me, because if you do, I swear you'll never see him again. I won't disappear," he said, his voice full of determination. "That's a promise." When they hung up, Alexander stood by the window looking at the city lights. For the first time in years, he felt something he thought he'd lost forever. Hope. Saturday, Millennium Park, 10 a.m. A chance to meet his son. Saturday morning was cold, but sunny. Alexander stood by the fountain in Millennium Park since 9:30, dressed in regular jeans and a sweater, as far as possible from the elegant suits he wore daily. He wanted to look approachable, normal, not like a millionaire, but like a person. In his pocket, he had a small wooden toy, a hand-carved soldier he'd bought at an antique market. He wasn't sure if there would be an appropriate moment to give it, but he wanted to have something he could offer if the opportunity arose. His heart pounded like a hammer. His hands were sweaty despite the cold. Did he even know how to talk to a 5-year-old? What if he said something wrong? What if Jacob didn't like him? And then he saw them. Natalie walked down the path holding Jacob's hand. The boy carried a small ball and was telling her something animatedly, waving his free hand. He wore a blue jacket and small sneakers. His hair gleamed in the sun. Alexander felt something tighten in his throat. This was his son, his child, small, alive, real. He began walking toward them, trying to look like a casual passerby. Natalie noticed him and nodded, a barely perceptible gesture. "Jacob, look," she suddenly said, pointing toward Alexander. "It's Mr. Alexander, an old friend of Mommy's." The boy looked at him with big, curious eyes. "Good morning," Alexander said, kneeling to be at the child's eye level. His voice trembled. "Good morning," Jacob replied politely, but with childish shyness. "I was just here by chance," Alexander lied, looking at Natalie. "What a surprise." "Yes, quite a surprise," Natalie answered with a weak smile. "Jacob, maybe you can show Mr. Alexander how you can kick the ball?" The boy's eyes lit up. "Really? I can?" "Sure," Alexander said. "I'd love to see." Jacob placed the ball on the ground and stepped back a few steps, then ran and kicked it with all his might. The ball flew several meters away. "Wow!" Alexander called out. And it wasn't fake. His son had just kicked a ball. His son. It was amazing. "Coach says I should be a goalkeeper, but I want to score goals," Jacob said, suddenly less shy. "Goalkeepers are important too," Alexander replied. "But I understand. Scoring goals is more fun." For the next hour they played together. Alexander, Jacob, and Natalie, who sat on a bench watching them with a mixture of anxiety and hope on her face. Alexander ran after the ball, pretending he couldn't catch it, while Jacob giggled and showed him the proper way to kick. He talked with the boy about his favorite superheroes, about preschool, about whether he liked apple pancakes. And with every minute, something inside him broke and rebuilt itself, simultaneously. This wasn't a strange boy. This was his son. He had his smile, his mannerisms, even the same way of wrinkling his nose when he concentrated. But more than that, Jacob was wonderful, intelligent, funny, kind. Natalie had raised him well, better than Alexander ever could have alone. At one point, Jacob tripped and fell. He didn't cry, but Alexander was immediately there. "Everything okay?" he asked, checking the boy's knee. "It's nothing," Jacob said bravely. "Just hurts a little." "You're brave," Alexander said, and his voice broke. "Very brave." Jacob looked at him curiously. "Are you crying?" No, Alexander quickly wiped his eyes. It's just the wind. But Jacob smiled. That little understanding smile children have when they know adults are lying but decide to forgive it. My mom sometimes cries from the wind too, he said conspiratorially. When the sun began moving toward the west, Natalie stood from the bench. Jacob, we have to go. I promised we'd get ice cream. Before lunch. Just a little longer, the boy protested. We have to, she said firmly, but gently. Jacob sighed with resignation, then looked at Alexander. Will you come next time? He asked. To play with us? Alexander looked at Natalie, who hesitated for a moment, then nodded. If your mom allows it, he said. I'd very much like to. Then it's settled, Natalie said quietly. As they walked away, Jacob waved energetically. Alexander waved back, standing in the park long after they'd disappeared from view. Only then did he allow himself to really cry. The next day, Natalie called. Jacob won't stop talking about you, she said. He keeps asking when we'll see Mr. Alexander again. Is that good or bad? It's complicated, but I think good. Natalie, I want to be part of his life. Really. Not just for a few hours in the park. I know. I saw it yesterday. The way you looked at him. Like he was a miracle. Like I looked at him when he was born. Silence. Can we meet? Again? Alexander asked. Next week? Yes, Natalie answered. But we need to talk, you and I, without Jacob, about how this is all going to work. Because if you really want to be his father, we need to establish rules. I agree to anything. Don't say that. You don't know the conditions yet. I don't care. I'll do whatever it takes. He heard her sigh. Tuesday evening. The gallery. After closing. Come at 8. I'll be there. When they hung up, Alexander sat in his office, and for the first time in many years, felt something he couldn't name. It was fear mixed with joy, uncertainty mixed with determination. But above all, it was the feeling that his life finally had meaning. Tuesday evening came too quickly and too slowly at once. Alexander stood in front of Natalie's gallery at exactly 80, holding a folder of documents he'd prepared. Proof of the change he wanted to show. Proposals, plans, commitments, everything in black and white. Natalie opened the door before he could knock. She looked tired but was dressed carefully. Black dress, hair down. She looked like he remembered her from their first date years ago. Come in, she said quietly. The gallery was empty and quiet. Only one light shone over a small table, where Natalie had prepared coffee and 2 cups. They sat across from each other. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting, Alexander began. Jacob forced me to, she replied, but there was no malice in her voice. He won't stop asking about Mr. Bois. Alexander, when will he see him again? Can we invite him to dinner? Really, this is hard for me. For 5 years I was the only person in his life, and now suddenly there's someone new who fascinates him. I don't want to replace you, Natalie. I know, she sighed, but I'm still scared. Of what? That you'll hurt him, that you'll get tired, that business will become more important again. And then Jacob will ask, where's Mr. Alexander? And I won't know what to tell him. Alexander opened the folder and pulled out documents. I restructured the management in the company, he said. I hired a new chief operating officer. Most decisions will now be made without me. I reduced my schedule by 60%. Natalie looked at the documents in disbelief. What did you do? I changed my priorities. The company can function without my daily presence, but Jacob can't wait until I have time. This is a huge change. You and my mother were right. My whole life I thought success was measured by money in the bank. But true wealth is time. Time with people you love. Natalie took the documents with trembling hands, flipping through them. I can't believe you did this. I did it because I want to be a father. A real father. Not someone who shows up once a month with an expensive gift and disappears. I want to be there for dinners, homework, bedtime stories. Tears streamed down Natalie's cheeks. Why couldn't you be like this when we were together? Because I was stupid, Alexander answered quietly. Because I thought I had time, that you were certain, that I could postpone what was important for later. And then, later, never came. Natalie set down the documents and covered her face with her hands. Her shoulders shook. I was so lonely, she whispered. Through the whole pregnancy, through childbirth, through Jacob's first steps. I wanted to share those moments with you, But you said those words and I thought you didn't care. Alexander stood, and I approached her, kneeling beside the chair. I'm sorry, he said, his voice full of pain. I'm sorry for every day I wasn't there, for every night you spent alone, for making you believe you weren't the most important thing. Because you were. You always were. Then why didn't you show it? Because I didn't know how. My father never showed it. He taught me to build businesses but not to love, and I repeated his mistakes without even knowing it. Natalie looked at him through tears. What happens? Now? Now, we do this slowly, Alexander answered. On your terms. I'll come as often as you allow. I'll build a relationship with Jacob step by step. And someday, if you think I'm ready, you'll tell him the truth. And if I never think you're ready, then I'll keep trying. For the rest of my life, if necessary. Natalie wiped her tears. I have conditions, she finally said. I'm listening. First, you never break a promise made to Jacob. If you say you'll come, you come. If you say you'll do something, you do it. Words matter to children. I understand. Second, you won't buy his love. No expensive gifts. No trips to Paris or London. You don't buy his love. You earn it. Agreed. Third, we'll go to therapy. You, me, and eventually Jacob if necessary. We have to resolve our past before we build a future. Alexander nodded, his throat tight with emotion. And last, Natalie looked straight into his eyes. If you ever decide this is too hard, that you can't continue, you tell me. Immediately. You don't disappear quietly. You don't leave us in uncertainty. We're worth that. You're worth everything, Alexander replied. And I swear on everything I have, on the company, on the money, on my own life, that I won't disappear. Not again. Natalie stood and walked to the window, looking at nighttime Chicago. Next Saturday, Jacob has a soccer game, she said quietly. Field by elementary school Tucker 12. The game starts at 10 though. I'll be there. And Wednesday is his birthday. He turns 6. There'll be a small party at our place. A few friends from preschool. Cake. Games. Would you like me to come? Jacob would like it, she answered, turning to him. And I think I would too. Alexander felt his heart break and heal simultaneously. I'll come, he said, with the best gift that doesn't cost money. What's that? My time. The whole afternoon. All my energy. My whole heart. For the first time that evening, Natalie smiled. Really, sincerely. That sounds like a good start. As Alexander left the gallery, Natalie called after him. Alexander? He turned. I never told you, she said quietly. But Jacob has your eyes, and your laugh, and sometimes when he looks at the stars from the window before bed, he says wise and deep things. And then I think he has your mind too. He has something better than me, Alexander replied. He has you as a mother. Natalie nodded, tears in her eyes again. Good night, Alexander. Good night, Natalie. As he returned to his car, Alexander looked at the sky. Stars shone brightly despite the city lights. In a week, his son's first game. In 10 days, his 6th birthday. And for the first time in 6 years, Alexander had something worth waiting for. Continuing in next response due to length. Wednesday came faster than Alexander expected. He stood in front of Natalie's apartment door in Lincoln Park, holding a small box. It wasn't an expensive gift. He was following Natalie's rules. It was a model, airplane building kit. Simple and educational, one he'd had as a child himself. To it he'd added something much more valuable, a yellowed photograph of himself as a 5-year-old, building a similar model with his own father. He wanted Jacob to know he shared these interests with someone, even if he didn't yet know who that someone was. He rang the doorbell. From inside came children's voices and laughter. Natalie opened, dressed in a light sweater and jeans. She looked younger, more relaxed, than at their last meeting. You came, she said with a slight smile. I promised. Come in. Jacob's in the living room with friends. I warn you, it'll be loud. She was right. The living room was full of 6-year-old boys and girls running in circles, playing with toys and shrieking with joy. Balloons hung from the ceiling, and on the table stood a large cake shaped like a soccer ball. Jacob saw him first. Mr. Alexander, he shouted, running toward him. You came. Of course I came, Alexander said, kneeling. It's your birthday. I wouldn't miss it for anything in the world. Do you have a present? Jacob asked with childish honesty. Jacob, Natalie admonished. It's all right, Alexander laughed. Yes, I have one, but maybe you can open it later. First, play with your friends. Okay. For the next 3 hours, Alexander did something he'd never done before. He was simply present. He helped organize games, pretended to be a dragon in Knights and Dragons, distributed pieces of cake, wiped chocolate from children's faces, and the whole time he watched Jacob, the way he shared toys with friends, how he comforted a little girl who'd fallen, how he laughed with that deep, genuine laugh. His son was a good child, kind, happy. At one point, Natalie stood beside him, watching the same scene. You're doing well, she said quietly. I'm learning, Alexander replied. Every minute. I see that. I see how you look at him. With love, real, unconditional love. Alexander felt a tightness in his throat. Because I love him. I know it sounds strange. I've only known him a few weeks, but it's true. It's not strange, Natalie whispered. That's parenthood. When guests started leaving, Jacob ran to Alexander with the box. Can I open it now? Of course. The boy tore the paper with enthusiasm. When he saw the airplane building kit, his eyes lit up. This is so cool. Mom, look, a beautiful present. It's a beautiful gift, Natalie said, looking at Alexander with understanding. There's something else, Alexander added, pulling out the photo. This is me when I was your age. My dad and I also built an airplane. Jacob took the photo carefully, studying it closely. You look like me, he finally said. Really? Alexander asked, his throat tight. Yes, we have the same noses, Jacob laughed. Natalie turned away, wiping her eyes. Jacob, time to change, she said. Say goodbye to Mr. Alexander. But I don't want him to leave. I have to, Alexander said. But, he looked at Natalie questioningly. She nodded. But I'll come Saturday to your game. I want to see you score goals. Really? You promise? I promise. Jacob threw himself at him, hugging him with small arms. Alexander closed his eyes, holding his son for the first time in his life. It was the best feeling in the world. When Jacob ran to his room, Natalie walked Alexander to the door. Thank you, she said, for coming, for being here, for everything. I should be thanking you for the chance. I want to tell you something. Natalie took a deep breath. I think it's time, soon, to tell him. Alexander's heart beat faster. Are you sure? No, she admitted. But I see how you are with him. I see it's real. And Jacob, he's starting to love you, even if he doesn't understand why yet. When? I don't know yet. But soon. We have to find the right moment, the right words. I'll be ready, Alexander said. Whenever you are. That evening in his apartment, Alexander didn't work, didn't check emails, didn't worry about financial reports. Instead, he sat on the balcony looking at the stars and thinking about small arms hugging him tight. For the first time in years, he didn't feel lonely. Saturday at the field was beautiful. Alexander stood on the sideline with other parents, cheering for Jacob's team. Natalie was beside him, shouting encouragements. Jacob played with his whole heart. Ran, kicked, defended. In the second half, he got the ball and headed toward the goal. A bigger boy was defending him, but Jacob was faster. He passed him and, "Goal!" Alexander shouted louder than ever in his life. Natalie jumped with joy, and Jacob, that little boy on the field, searched for them in the crowd. When he found them, he waved with the biggest smile in the world. "Did you see?" he shouted after the game, running to them. "I scored a goal." "You were amazing," Alexander said, lifting him up. "You were the best, the very best." Natalie, I added. Jacob hugged them both around the neck, pulling them closer together. "You're the best," he said. "Both of you." Natalie and Alexander looked at each other over the boy's head. In her eyes were tears, but also something more. Forgiveness, hope, maybe even the beginning of something new. "Ice cream," she proposed. "Ice cream," Alexander agreed. And so the three of them walked together through the park, Jacob between them, holding both their hands. They weren't yet a family, not in the full sense of the word, but they were on their way. 2 months passed. 2 months of regular meetings, shared dinners, evenings spent building model airplanes. 2 months during which Alexander learned to be more than just Mr. Alexander, learned to be part of Jacob's life. They went to the zoo together, played soccer in the park. Alexander helped with preschool homework. read bedtime stories when Natalie let him stay long enough. And with each day, the bond between them grew. Natural, organic, real. Natalie was changing too. Her face, once tense and full of distrust, now more often brightened with a smile. Sometimes when she thought Alexander wasn't looking, she'd watch him with Jacob. And in her eyes was something he hadn't seen in years. Maybe it wasn't yet love, but it was warmth, respect, the beginnings of something that could someday be rebuilt. Therapy came too. Once a week, Alexander and Natalie sat across from Dr. Joanna, a woman in her 60s with a warm voice and penetrating gaze. They talked about the past, about pain, about words that had hurt, about silence that had been even worse. Alexander had to face who he'd been, a man who'd loved his work more than people, who'd feared closeness because he'd never received it from his own father. Natalie spoke about her loneliness, about nights when she'd cried, holding her pregnant belly, wondering if she'd made the right decision, about fear that Alexander would destroy Jacob's heart the way he'd destroyed hers. But they also talked about the present, about changes, about hope. "I see progress," Dr. Joanna said in one session. "You've both come a long way. Sometimes I'm still afraid," Natalie admitted, "that this is all temporary, that one day Alexander will disappear." "I won't disappear," Alexander said for the 100th time, and each time he said it with the same determination. "I believe you," Natalie whispered. "I really do." It was a breakthrough. The next day, Natalie called him early in the morning. "I want to tell him," she said without preamble. "Tonight. I want you there." Alexander's heart beat faster. "Are you sure?" "Yes. I talked to Dr. Joanna. She said Jacob is ready, and that we're ready. Tell me what to do. Just be yourself. Be the man you've become these past 2 months. The rest will come naturally." That evening, Alexander sat in Natalie's living room, hands sweaty, heart pounding like crazy. Jacob was in his room, having just finished dinner. Natalie went to get him. They returned together, Jacob holding his mother's hand, clearly puzzled by the seriousness of the situation. "Sweetheart, sit down," Natalie said gently. "We need to talk to you." "About what?" Jacob asked, sitting between them on the couch. Natalie looked at Alexander. He nodded. Together. They'd do this together. "Jacob," Natalie began, taking her son's hand. "Remember how I told you your daddy had to go away before you were born?" "Yes," the boy answered quietly. "That wasn't the whole truth, honey. The truth is, your daddy didn't know you were going to be born, and that was my fault. I didn't tell him." Jacob looked at his mother with confusion. "But why?" "Because we were very sad then. Mommy and Daddy fought a lot, and Mommy thought it would be better if she raised you alone. But Mommy was wrong. I was wrong too," Alexander added quietly, his voice trembling. "Because if I'd known about you, Jacob, if I'd known you existed, I would have come from the other end of the world to see you." Jacob turned to him, big eyes full of questions. "Mr. Alexander, is your daddy?" Natalie finished. "Mr. Alexander is your daddy, Jacob." Silence filled the room. Jacob looked at Alexander, processing the information. His little face went through a multitude of emotions. Surprise, confusion, and then, slowly, understanding. "That's why we look alike?" he finally asked. Alexander laughed through tears. "Yes, that's why we look alike. And that's why you always come and play with me and read me stories." "Yes, sweetheart," Natalie said. "Because he loves you. He's always loved you, even when he didn't know you existed." Jacob was silent for a long moment, then looked at Alexander. Will Daddy stay forever now?" Alexander knelt before his son, taking his small hands in his. "Forever," he said, tears flowing freely. "I swear to you, Jacob, I'll never leave you again. Never again will you have to wonder where your daddy is, because I'll be here, always." Jacob threw himself into his arms, hugging him tightly. "I have a daddy," he whispered. "I have a real daddy." "Yes," Alexander replied, holding his son as if he were the most precious thing in the world, because he was. "And I have you, the best gift I ever got," Natalie cried, watching them. Alexander reached out, inviting her into the embrace. She hesitated only for a moment, then joined them. And so they sat, the three of them. A family separated for years by pain and silence, but now reunited. Not everything was fixed. There were still difficult conversations ahead, compromises, learning to be together. But the most important thing was done. They were together, and this time, no one was leaving anyone. Epilogue. 1 year later. Chicago looked beautiful on a December afternoon. Snow fell lightly, covering the city with a white blanket. In the cozy apartment in Lincoln Park, now not just Natalie's but all three of theirs, it smelled of gingerbread and Christmas tree. Alexander sat on the floor by the fireplace, helping 7-year-old Jacob build another model airplane. Natalie sat on the couch, watching them with a warm smile. "Dad, look, this wing is crooked," Jacob laughed. "Doesn't matter," Alexander replied. "We'll fix it together." Together. That word had taken on new meaning. Over the past year, everything had changed. Alexander had sold his sterile apartment and moved here, to a home full of life, laughter, and love. His company functioned excellently under new management, and he devoted most of his time to family. He went to every one of Jacob's games, every school event, every parent-teacher meeting, and slowly, step by step, his relationship with Natalie was rebuilding too. They hadn't immediately become a couple in love again. Too many wounds had to heal. But there were moments. Glances exchanged over sleeping Jacob's head. Touches of hands while cooking dinner together. Conversations late into the night that gave hope that someday love would return. "Tomorrow's Christmas Eve," Natalie said. "Your mother is coming, Alexander, and my sister with her family. Big family dinner." Alexander smiled. "Who would have thought a year ago we'd be here?" "I knew," Jacob suddenly said, looking at them with his wise eyes. "I knew we were a family from the very beginning." Alexander and Natalie looked at each other, both with tears in their eyes. "Yes, sweetheart," Natalie said. "We always were. It just took us a while to understand." That evening, when Jacob was already asleep, Alexander and Natalie sat together by the Christmas tree, drinking hot chocolate. "Do you ever think about what it would have been like if we hadn't separated back then?" Natalie asked quietly. "Sometimes," Alexander admitted. "But then, I think that maybe we had to separate to learn how to be together, to appreciate what we have. It was a long lesson, but worth every moment," he said, taking her hand, "because now I know what's really important, and I'll never forget it again." Natalie rested her head on his shoulder. "Do you think Jacob will be happy?" "I think he already is," Alexander answered. "He has a mother who loved him enough to raise him alone for 5 years. And he has a father who loves him enough to spend the rest of his life making up for lost time. Sounds like a happy boy. Sounds like a happy family." They sat in silence, watching the twinkling lights on the Christmas tree. Outside the window, snow continued to fall, covering the world with hope and new beginnings. Alexander had everything he'd ever wanted, but not in expensive cars or impressive offices. He had it in a small hand holding his, saying, "Dad." He had it in the smile of a woman who'd given him a second chance. He had it in the warmth of a home full of love. He'd lost 5 years, but he'd gained a whole life. And this time, he wouldn't waste a single moment. If this story touched your heart, remember, it's never too late to change, never too late to, be the parent your child deserves. Never too late to fix the mistakes of the past. Share this with someone who needs to know that second chances are real, that love can heal even the deepest wounds, and that sometimes the greatest gift we can give is simply being present. Subscribe if you believe in redemption, in the power of family, and in fathers who fight for the chance to be dads. Because sometimes the 5 years you lost become the catalyst for a lifetime you'll never take for granted again.